Welcome back, delegates. If you would all like to take your seats, please. Good afternoon, friends. I hope you've all had some refreshment, and really good to see everybody back here and all on time, just about. That's very welcome indeed. Can I also welcome those who are joining us as we now enter the public space of our conference. We are moving on to our formal launch of the Scottish National Party's 90th annual gathering. And it's with great pleasure that in a few moments that we will all hear from our depute leader, Keith Brown, MSP. And I know that Keith will be no stranger to anyone in this hall, given the hours and the miles that he puts in to visit constituency associations, branches, and to help out in local campaigns as well. And also, I hope Keith doesn't mind, but in case nobody knows, Keith is also now a grandfather, so we should all congratulate him. So, given that we are all in the business of standing up for Scotland and redoubling our efforts as a party and as a movement to persuade the people of Scotland that independence is indeed in the best interest of our collective future, it gives me very great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Keith Brown, MEP and Deputy Leader of the Scottish National Party, who is now going to make his address and formally open conference. Thank you, Keith.
Good afternoon, conference. I should say, first of all, to explain this tie, it's not just that I'm an uber loyalist that we've got SNP emblazoned on the tie, but this morning, instead of coming straight to conference, I had to pick up a dear friend, so I had to go through to Glasgow and forgot to pick up the ties I'd laid out to bring. And I mention that because I want to mention that friend. That friend is somebody known to everybody, I think, in this hall, certainly most people in this hall, someone that's done a huge amount of work for independence and for our cause, someone who continues to do a huge amount of work, but is going through a tough time just now. So could you show your appreciation for Christina McKelvey, MSP? I can tell by that look I'm going to get pelters after we move out of here. But friends, it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our 90th annual SNP Conference. And of course, a lot has happened since last we gathered in Aberdeen. And I want to begin my remarks by, first of all, paying tribute to Hamza Yousaf. Throughout his leadership, Hamza conducted himself with the utmost grace and integrity, and he demonstrated the values of inclusion and international solidarity that this party prides itself on, and in particular, his passionate advocacy for peace in Gaza during what were times of unimaginable torment for him and his family, showed the mark of the man and demonstrated the true leadership which was so sadly lacking from the Westminster parties. And I know that Hamza will continue to make an important contribution both to the SNP and to the cause of independence. And I want to thank him for all that he did for our party and for our country. Thank you, Hamza. At conference, as we heard this morning, we now have a new party leader in John Swinney. John is a man of unparalleled experience in Scottish politics, and he stepped up a time when his party and his country needed him most. He is a man who has dedicated his entire adult life to the cause that we all hold so dear. And I personally can think of no one better to be leading the SNP into our next chapter. And as we face the challenge of a renewed onslaught of Westminster austerity, there is absolutely nobody that I would trust more to stand up for Scotland and to demonstrate the leadership that we need to defend Scotland's values. And there's no question, friends, that this past year has tested our resolve and our commitment to our shared cause. We've faced significant challenges within our party over the last 12 to 18 months. And in July, of course, we had to bid farewell to too many dedicated ambassadors for independence, along with the hard-working staff who supported them in that task. And I want, on behalf of the party, to extend my deepest gratitude to each and every one of them, MPs and staff. But I look forward to continuing the journey towards independence together in whatever capacity they choose to follow. Delegates, in the aftermath and it's particularly gratifying to see so many former MPs and their staff with us here today. Delegates, in the aftermath of the general election, John Swinney has ensured that the SNP has been thoughtfully, considerately discussing the challenges that we face as a party. He has facilitated discussions with our members the length and breadth of Scotland. We've spoken with activists, with candidates, and we've reached out to every single member in our party. I don't know what the final figure was, but it was certainly into 5 figures, the number of members that responded to the member survey. Bear in mind, if you combined all the membership of the other parties, you couldn't even get into 5 figures. So that's an astonishing level of engagement. And John wanted to do that, to share ideas, to share the feedback, which we have to make sure that we understand what's happened in order that we can better prosecute the case for independence. So I'm deeply grateful to everybody in the party who has engaged over this time. And I was delighted that so many contributed in the culmination of that discussion this morning. And now, as a party, it's time for us to move forward. I think we would all like more time to discuss those things, but we've got an election and independence to win, so we have to move forward. We have to learn the lessons from the past, of course, but we also have to be focused relentlessly on Scotland's future. One of the points made by this morning was all the achievements, all the fantastic things which the SNP government since 2007 has done for Scotland are great, but we have to say what we will now and what independence will now do for Scotland. Because there's never been a more important time for the SNP to be standing up for Scotland. Now, our opponents would have you believe that the SNP and the cause of independence are over and finished. They suggest it's time for us to pack up and go home. These are the same people who claimed that winning 56 or 48 out of 59 Westminster constituencies, or 63 or 64 seats in Holyrood, were not sufficient mandates. And now they tell us that a party not achieving a majority of seats has to accept defeat and abandon hope. Of course, these are one of the strange rules that only ever apply to the SNP and to independence. And I wonder if anybody can remember these voices calling for Labour to abandon their cause when they won 1 seat out of 59 in Scotland. Or for the Conservative voices calling for us to desist from campaigning for independence when they got 0 seats out of 72 seats. So we've never achieved that. As was mentioned this morning, tough though that election result was, it was the 5th best result we've had in 25 elections, 30% of the vote. And let's not forget that the same flawed first-past-the-post system that benefited us in 2015, and it did, and subsequently, that has now given Labour the jackpot with 37 out of 56 seats, despite only winning 35% of the vote, while we secured 30% of that vote, but far fewer seats. But friends, the idea of independence has faced much bigger setbacks than this. John often talks about the years that he's been in the party, and I was a few years after him. But in 1984, when I joined, going round a by-election in Arbroath, as I recall, which we won actually, Ken Gild won the seat, it was 1 in every 10 or 15 doors before you could get somebody supporting the SNP or independence. Interestingly, the idea you're called a careerist when in the early 1980s you joined the SNP, I'm not sure what kind of career you're hoping for by joining the SNP in the 1980s. But we have faced tough times in the past. In relation to internal work within the party, which John has ensured has continued, are the stabilisation of the party's finances and growing our membership, still larger, much larger than all the other parties in Scotland combined. Now, I don't know what the other parties' membership. I'm willing to guess if you added them all together and doubled it, they wouldn't match the 64, 65,000 members that we have. If I'm wrong, let them say so. Tell us what your membership is, but they won't do that. We also, let's not forget, have by far the largest number of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. And my prediction is, there's a great deal to look forward to. I think we will regroup, just talking to delegates, the idea of, in defiance of the result, that we go forward, that we redouble our efforts, we continue our mission to achieve Scotland's independence. And when we get knocked down, we get back up again. And now we face a Labour Party in power, claiming victory on a message of change. And yet tens of thousands of our pensioners are about to experience the harsh reality of Labour's change. Stripping away the winter fuel allowance while allowing a 10% increase in the energy price cap will mean many of our pensioners facing a winter of misery and freezing. Labour's promise of change was a lie. Anas Sarwar told us to read his lips when he vowed no tax hikes, no more austerity, but we now see those were empty words. And as we approach the 2026 election, I believe that Anas Sarwar will come to regret his part in deceiving the Scottish people. And Labour under Keir Starmer is doubling down on failed Tory austerity. The black hole in their finances, predicted by economists, by the IFS, by John Swinney, probably even by the dogs in the street, everyone knew about the £18 billion black hole, apart from the Labour Party, apparently. So rather than the first year of a new government, what we're about to do is enter the 15th year of a government which is still defined by David Cameron and George Osborne. Austerity. And I think if you talk to people, you can already see the effect of that. This is not what they voted for. And Labour prided themselves after the election. It was John McTiernan. What was really good about that election, he said, was that our manifesto was so vague we can't be held to anything. The problem is, people invested in the idea of change. They thought real change was going to come. And now they realise there is no change. It's continuing Brexit, it's continuing austerity. And that's a big problem that Labour are already encountering. Those who hoped to vote out the Tories were deceived by Labour's illusory change. And is this endless cycle of misery Scotland has to endure inevitable? Alternating between Tory and Labour bouts of austerity, all while being isolated in a broken Brexit Britain. It does not have to be this way. We, the SNP, independents, can create a Scotland that rejoins, first of all, the largest market in the world, the EU. We can have a situation where our pensioners live with dignity and not with fear and not with the cold. A Scotland where our abundant natural resources, once they've squandered all the oil billions, they now want to move on to renewable energy wealth. But we could use that to fund strong public services and decent wages for all our public services. And it's interesting that Rachel Reeves is now attacking the SNP for spending too much money on paying public sector workers. That's the Labour Party. Conference, the SNP, by contrast, is showing the people of Scotland every single day what can be achieved, even with the limited powers of devolution. In government, we are using all the powers that we have to transform the lives of people in this country every single day. The evidence is clear. Since the people of Scotland put their trust in the SNP government in 2007, I'm going to give a list of things that we've done. Actually, John does this very well because he takes it from when somebody's a baby and they're born with a baby box, all the benefits, but some of them, free university tuition fees. And I've lost count the number of people that said, I cannot afford £30,000 for my child to go to university. They would not be going unless the SNP had introduced and maintained free tuition fees. A massive... We've seen a massive expansion of free childcare. We've seen higher pay in Scotland for nurses, for teachers and other key public sector workers. And the Scottish Child Payment, which is contributing to keeping around 100,000 children in Scotland out of poverty. Now, that is one sentence, but it's worth thinking about. 100,000 kids that will be clothed, fed and warmed that would not otherwise have those basic essentials. All of those policies are improving lives here in Scotland, and that's because of the choices the SNP have made. It's also because the people of Scotland have chosen the SNP. So we're using the limited powers of devolution to make life better, better for people, and also to build a better Scotland. But that ambition is constantly pulled back because we suffer from the consequences of not being independent. And it's become fashionable amongst journalists. You're not even allowed to say this is because of Westminster. Unless, of course, you're Welsh Labour, then it's all roads lead to Westminster. In Scotland, it must be the fault of the SNP. But the clue is in the word consequentials. England decides what it needs to spend on its public services, and we get some money as a consequence. Not because somebody's worked out what Scotland needs, because they've worked out what England needs, and we get money as a consequence. So there is a consequence between Westminster underfunding and the powers that we have here and trying to fund proper public services. But friends, the crucial question is, how do we achieve independence? Now, unionists will ask us that question, and they do it with a sneer, hoping that they've diverted Scotland into a constitutional dead end. They ignore all the election results, all the mandates, the ones they dislike, pretending that Scots are bound, another one of these unique rules to Scotland, bound by an arbitrary once-in-a-generation rule that they themselves can't even define. And Labour and Tory alike claim the right to decide when or if Scotland can vote on its future. And as a spoiler alert, they've decided that we can't. We will not be allowed to decide on our future. They claim at the same time to support self-determination, but how can a country truly determine its own future when the right to vote on that future is denied by another country? That is not self-determination. And this question, though, we have to concede, comes from those that support independence as well. Those who passionately support it for independence and yearn for the opportunity to vote for it. So how do we achieve that in the face of the UK's undemocratic obstinacy? Because we know that the media are not going to be confronting the UK saying, why are you being so undemocratic? It's going to be the SNP's problem, Scotland's problem, the independence movement's problem. They should be asking why they've set their face against us. But how do we move beyond that? And it strikes at the heart of our campaign for independence. And it will be my view, it's my view, and we have to have a discussion as a party as to how we achieve this. But the ability to demonstrate how we achieve independence, as well as the benefits, will be central, in my view, to the success of the 2026 election. We have to, first of all, acknowledge Westminster's stance. They've been clear. Neither Labour nor Tory will, in their words, allow the people of Scotland to choose their own future. So let's take them at their word. We have to do that. But let's also take the decision out of their hands. What is the higher power that exists, a higher power than Westminster, a higher power that stands supreme over the UK Supreme Court? The answer is simple. It's the people of Scotland, the sovereign people of Scotland. And in 2026, the people of Scotland must know, they have to believe, that supporting the SNP on a shared platform with others that support the same ideals, supporting that party gives that party, if they achieve the mandate that we seek, to advocate for independence. And it means, in my view, backing a convention of all democratically elected representatives in the Scottish Parliament, in Westminster, in councils, regardless of party. All they're required to do to join is to believe, support Scotland's right to choose. Not even independence, Scotland's right to choose. And that convention can then unite with every willing element of civic Scotland. We already know that the STU support the principle of Scotland's right to choose. Many other institutions do as well. So we have to try and encourage them to be part of that convention. And we need to demonstrate that support, the breadth and the wealth of that support, through every democratic means available. And we also, as a second part to that, have to activate the growing and very substantial international support there is for Scotland's right to self-determination. The work done by Fiona Hislop, many Scottish ministers over a number of years to talk to our friends internationally, people like, I know he's here, Alan Smith, others that have been involved in different international fora, to make sure that people understand Scotland's situation and support our right to choose. It's time, it will be time in 2026 to make sure that pays its dividends, that we get expressions of support for the democratic case for independence. And through that convention, through that international support, the third element is public support. We have to advance the opportunities for that mandate, which will be provided by getting a majority of representatives elected to Scotland's National Parliament. We have to make sure that is publicly supported. We have sometimes been a wee bit kind of reluctant in terms of marches and demonstrations, public demonstrations of support for an ideal, but many of you will remember, as I do, 1992. Scotland United, over in the Meadows, huge public demonstrations of Scotland's right to choose. We have to make sure we mobilise the public. I remember when Ian Blackford led the walkout at Westminster. We put 7,000 new members on in 2 weeks. And I went outside the Scottish Parliament because it was a spontaneous demonstration. And the number of people there that said they joined that demonstration, they joined the SNP, they'd never before been involved in a political party, they just could not stand to see the way Scotland was being treated. As Stephen Flynn and his colleagues were treated by the Speaker in Westminster during the Gaza discussion. So, delegates, it's never been more important for us to persuade the majority of people in Scotland of the merits of independence. And at the election we've had, it was clear that we did not convince enough people that independence was their immediate priority, which would improve their lives. And it's up to us to change that. When Keir Starmer says things are going to get worse, he says it like it's an inevitability. And it's strange, it strikes me how it's changed from 97 when things could only get better. And now Labour's changes, things can only get worse. We know it's not inevitable that you have to accept this austerity, the poverty, the pensioner poverty, the wages suppression, all the elements of austerity which mark the UK out from other countries. We know it's not inevitable. It's a choice that the Tories made, and it's a choice that Labour are also making. Keir Starmer has said that the UK has gone to ruin. But, delegates, Scotland doesn't have to live amongst the rubble of that ruin. There is an alternative future available to us, and that future is independence. And, delegates, it's up to us in this room, the point the First Minister made earlier on today, it's up to each of us in this room to get out there and make the case together to our fellow citizens. Unlike our critics who say we're finished, the campaign for independence is not over. It has moved on to its next phase. So let's commit today to making sure that next phase is the last phase and we move to independence for our country. Thank you, delegates.
Thank you very much. Keith, you never disappoint, and I'm very pleased that the party delegates have showed their appreciation of you.